Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
A little something from the law. There'll probably be a lot of something from the law, Sarge. My goodness, we're bringing it here on the Morgan Streetman Show. Got Roxanne Wilder in the house today. Pat George is here.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, you better weigh in or they're going to think I'm making it up again.
I've been staring at the Howard Franklin Bridge here. It's wet out there.
It is a dreary day.
People need to slow down on the roadways right now.
Oh, yeah. Did you see me coming across a little earlier?
I did. That was that blur, that white blur.
The white blur.
And people don't know how to drive in the rain. Even those who live here, you find some that say, how do you not know how to drive like this?
Well, I do have to say,
conditions.
Being in Florida, I agree with you. I was thinking that on the way home because I just drove to Alabama last week and then drove home.
How fast do they drive on the interstate?
In Alabama?
No, in Florida, too.
Oh, in Florida. Well, in Florida, people are flying.
Yes!
People are flying. Like when it's raining, you actually step on the accelerator more.
I looked at the speedometer yesterday. I was doing 80.
Uh-huh.
The speedometer
Where
was
were you
70.
doing 80?
On 75. I was driving my wife's car, and it's a little tiny sports car. I looked down. 70 is the limit. Oh, I'm driving 80, but everyone's passing me.
I know.
They were passing me like I was like
the
driving.
Howard Franklin in the morning.
That's insane. I'm 10 miles over, and they're passing me.
I do have to say some people were freaking out in Alabama in the rain, though. They were like, we don't drive in this
what
stuff.
To do.
Yeah. And they think they can, reestablish the speed limit by They essentially blocked the road. 2 cars blocked the road. They put their flashers on like, all right, everybody, just slow down. 40 miles an hour. That's as fast as you can go in this rain. No pig squealing.
I like that accent.
You
Morgan,
like my pretend
you
Alabama?
You brought me there. You brought me there.
I'm from Mississippi, so I'm allowed to do that, right? I can make fun of us down home and sometimes the way we talk.
Hey, speaking of that, do you know where, what is it, Meridian, Mississippi is?
Sure. Yeah, I've been there many times.
Yeah, because we did the Beyond the Law this morning show, and they had to go there for a case.
Oh, really? What kind of case?
Yeah, it was a DWI case where head-on and someone died. And
Ooh.
Bad.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But they said there's absolutely nothing there.
Yeah,
and it's not easy to get there.
Yeah, these are the pop and gype guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're probably not getting the level of entertainment and stimulation that they're used to here in the Bay Area. That's for sure. But, there is folks there would say that's a big city.
And I know you have a lot on your list today, but I asked them, because Clearwater's putting fluoride back in the water.
Oh, are they really?
Yes, and I knew this was going to upset you. I even thought you might be listening this morning. I said, Morgan Streetman, if you're listening, because I know they're going to fire you up, call in and tell him, because he was all pro, put that fluoride in the water in Clearwater.
Well, why? Just because he heard people hear somebody say fluoride's good for your teeth.
Right.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I mean, and, that's we could talk all day about fluoride.
Yeah, I didn't want to start you on this.
We got a lot of things to talk about today. And how am I going to make the transition from fluoride to Chinese trade now, Pat George? You just took me to a place I can't get us back from now. Fluoride.
I don't know if China is a good place to get your toothpaste from.
I mean, I'm going Dr. Strangelove right here. That's all I could think about right now. But, we wanted to take a quick look back this week because we've been talking the last several weeks about the whole China trade war thing and some of the outcomes that you might be able to expect to see from that kind of behavior. And lo and behold, out comes a story, and it says, you know what? Look at Vietnamese trade. Because just this year, first three months of this year through the end of March, it's up 40% Vietnamese exports to the U.S. So that's exactly the type of thing that we would expect to see when you make it more expensive to produce and import something in China. And, of course, everybody here at home says, oh, my God, that's the only place that we can possibly get anything is from China. So, therefore, you're going to cost the American consumers more money for their goods. And lo and behold, what happens? Another producer steps up that doesn't have the tariffs, like Vietnam. And they say, everybody, turn the factories on. Let's get going. Let's get producing because now we have a competitive advantage to China for the American market. Our advantage is we don't have a 25% tariff on all these goods.
Have to give you some credit, Morgan, because not only did you predict that, but just your general consensus about how the trade war would move forward with China is somewhat taking shape the way that you imagined.
Well, let's hope it keeps going. And, we didn't even get to talk about it last week, but these Mexican tariffs, which turned out to be a bit of a scare, because off the air we're kind of talking about it and saying, are we going overboard? We're getting a lot of tariffs. And there were a lot of ideas about why is he putting these tariffs on? Well, guess what? He wasn't putting the tariffs on, as we now see. I mean, President Trump is just a master negotiator.
Is this country being run like a business?
It kind of is, and nobody ever knows where he's coming from. I mean, he's applying Sun Tzu's art of war perfectly. You don't know what to expect of this guy. One day he's putting tariffs on you. The next day he's taking them off and saying we're best friends. And I mean, it's just – and what I think he's actually doing is he's setting this up so he's putting all the responsibility for the situation onto the Mexicans. Because now they've said, okay, we will do the following if you'll take the tariffs off. He took the tariffs off. Now we get to wait and see, are they going to do what they said they were going to do? And if they don't, he'll slap the tariffs back on.
It's interesting, too, because even though we are a capitalist society, it's the other countries are probably saying to themselves, wait, we're expecting him to deal with us as politicians have always dealt with us. And he doesn't handle himself like a politician. He handles himself like a heavy-duty businessman negotiator.
And China and Russia now are best friends.
Well, you know, they'll never be best friends. But yes, I mean, they have a somewhat of an alliance, but that's a long-time alliance, but it's seen a lot of rockiness, too. I mean, they're essentially rivals in one way. But, you know, we're going to continue to see production shift to other countries. Now, yes, you have to be a little bit considerate of the idea of transshipment, which is definitely going on. In other words, some of that 40% out of Vietnam are Chinese goods that they're shipping to Vietnam, and they're getting relabeled as made in Vietnam and then shipped on. But it's my understanding, and I'm not there to check, but it's my understanding that overall that's a relatively smaller part of the uptick in production, and that, yes, in fact, most of that 40% is the Vietnamese are just now directly competing with the Chinese, who are at a disadvantage, and they're turning all their factories on, and they're pumping out the goods to come to America. And I got to say, if you've ever bought anything made in Vietnam, I mean, the quality is stunning. It's high quality stuff. In particular, they make a number of tactical products for, you know, military folks. And it's very high-quality stuff. The webbing and the sewing and everything else is excellent. I'm very impressed with things made in Vietnam. And the Vietnamese people, by and large, are extremely industrious people. I have a very good friend who's Vietnamese. And, I mean, they so impress me with their industriousness and their attitude. You know, they're amazing people. And I'm glad to support them. And I'm glad that some more of our American dollars are going there to their factories, and bringing over some of their products as opposed to just the Chinese products that we've been importing for so many years. We know we had a local interest story, and I don't know how local it is, but of course, anything within the state of Florida, I call local for the purposes of local interest. And the biggest story I saw out last week was the Broward County Sheriff's deputy named Scott Peterson, who was actually at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School when that shooting started. You know, he's been arrested now, and he's been charged criminally for his conduct during that shooting. And if you go out there and you watch the video, you see he definitely hangs back. Once the shooting starts, he actually takes up a position behind a concrete wall. And, you know, in his defense, and I don't know exactly what they trained him on ahead of time, but in his defense, he says, look, I was just doing exactly what we're trained to do in an active shooter situation where we don't have any more information other than knowing there's an active shooter. We're trained to adopt the position of, you know, of safety, kind of stand back from the fray until we figure things out some more. Mm-hmm. And I think time will tell what he was actually trained to do or not, but he's been charged with 7 counts of neglect of a child, 3 counts of culpable negligence, and a count of perjury. He's been hit with a bond amount of $102,000, which frankly sounds a little bit excessive for what this guy did. I mean, I highly doubt he's a flight risk at this point. And they say, of course, if he was convicted of all of these counts and then sentenced to the maximum, that he'd be looking at something like, I think it's 97 years in prison or something like that. Well, you know, we will wait and see what happens here, but this is definitely going to be an interesting story that's going to, you know, continue to pay dividends.
Hearing State Senator Lauren Book of Broward County, her opinion on everything, wow, she doesn't pull any punches. She says, I wish we could have gone further with the charges. She says, nonfeasance, misfeasance, malfeasance doesn't fit anyone more perfectly than this coward of Broward. This is an individual who didn't move for 48 minutes, provided misinformation for responding officers, which made everything more complicated and complex, and has stonewalled from the get-go.
Well, we're going to see how this all plays out because, you know, it seems to me like if a good criminal defense attorney gets a hold of this, there's a lot of room in there for reasonable doubt as to what this guy did and why. You know, when you've got bullets flying, it's pretty hard to hold somebody liable for their decision-making during that process because, you know, he's going to say, well, I didn't know what we know today. You know, hindsight is 20/20, and you got to kind of give him that. At the same time, I mean, I think we're all pretty well infuriated at the idea of a guy, particularly a law enforcement officer, who knows that children are being shot inside of a school and doesn't go rushing in to try to stop it. I mean, we talked about that at the time. That, you know, that's unfathomable for guys like us and Pat George and gals like you, Roxanne. I mean, we'd be going right in there even though we aren't law enforcement officers. So there is something to the idea that he's the coward of Broward. Folks, we've got a big guest when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Hey, right before the break, I told you that we're going to have a very special guest today, and we sure are hoping that we are, in fact, going to have a special guest. You got him? All right. You know, folks, you are not going to believe this. This is an amazing guest for us to get here on the Morgan Streetman Show, and we're so excited to have George Papadopoulos on today. So let's go ahead and bring him on. George, are you there?
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, you know, George, I just finished reading your book recently, Deep State Target. And I have to say that you've got just about the most interesting story to come out of this entire Russiagate thing. I mean, you were at the very center of all of it.
Yeah, it was an incredible story, and you know, in retrospect, it's even more insane to think that what happened to me was actually going on in the middle of a presidential campaign season, which it was from the beginning all the way through the transition team, basically. So your observation's dead on right.
Yeah, and for folks who haven't read your book, give us just a brief overview, because you had originally worked for the Ben Carson campaign, and then you went to work for a group in London called the London Center for International Law Practice, and then you got brought into the Trump campaign as an advisor. And tell us about what happened, you know, from there. Once you informed your current boss at the London Center for International Law Practice that you were going to be going to work for the Trump campaign, kind of at first he poo-pooed the idea a little bit, was my impression from your book. And then it seemed he got very excited about this idea and began to try to hook you up with certain people. So for our audience, tell us kind of what happened.
Sure, that's a great way to start the conversation. So there's a reason that the president, I was on Hannity, I think 2 weeks ago, I think, and I was mentioning the UK and Australian angle in the interference in the 2016 election. And the president, right before he went to Japan, started going on TV and talking about how Attorney General Barr needs to investigate the British and the Australians because so much of spying went through London. And this company that I was working for, as you call the London Center for International Law Practice, is a very mysterious company that reached out to me out of the blue when I was living in London. I was working on I had just left the Ben Carson campaign. I went back to London where I was working as an energy consultant out there for a couple companies. And they say, we want to make you a director here. And I said, okay, that's fine. I went there. The whole organization is filled with a lot of ex-Western diplomats, ex-Western intelligence types who are connected to the State Department, to the British government, et cetera. So it was a very, reputable type of place. But when I told them I'm leaving and joining the Trump campaign, they were horrified, basically telling me, what on earth are you doing? And then their antennas basically started to spring up, and they told me, before you go, you have to come to Rome with us, and we want to introduce you to some people. Now, as you saw in my book, the woman who introduced me to Joseph Mifsud, who is at the epicenter of the Russia hoax and probably why we're going to really understand the scandal a lot better, was Arvinder Sambe. And this woman worked with Bob Mueller directly after 9/11. She worked with the FBI in London, and she's the one that introduced me in Rome to this guy, Joseph Mifsud, who ends up becoming a fake Russian agent who tells me that the Russians have Hillary Clinton's emails, and apparently it's part of the reason why this whole investigation started in the first place.
And didn't he take you to a wasn't it like a luncheon where he took you with a lady who he claimed was Vladimir Putin's niece? But when you got there, I mean, this lady didn't even speak a lick of English and clearly wasn't Vladimir Putin's niece.
Well, exactly. And there's a reason that Devin Nunes has delivered 2 letters, one to the CIA heads and the other to the president, to look into Joseph Mifsud. Because during the president's recent trip to England, Devin Nunes asked the president to find out if Joseph Mifsud was connected to British intelligence, which all the overwhelming evidence now suggests that he was. So you refer to this this young lady he introduced me to, Putin's niece, the fake niece of Putin. It was clearly a setup. It was some sort of meeting that he wanted to have me partake in to make it look like I was dealing with Russians or talking to Russians so that he could later entrap me with this fake information that he tells me a couple weeks later.
Right, and he was the first one ever to say that Russia had Hillary's emails. That was kind of where that information started. Am I right about that?
Well, here there's a little misunderstanding about that. See, at the time, it was speculated all around the world that Hillary Clinton's State Department server was hacked. So when Joseph Mifsud told me, "Hey, the Russians have Hillary's emails," I simply saw it as him, validating a rumor that had been widespread throughout the world at that time. I never heard the word DNC. I never heard the word Podesta. So whatever he was doing, from what I've been told by various sources, and I think, a lot of people now are discussing it openly on television, is that his role was to basically drop this fake information in my lap. He told it to me over brunch at a London hotel in front of many people. So clearly, it wasn't some sort of secret information. And then hopefully later on, one of these spies that you've probably been reading on the front page of the New York Times or on the news recently, Alexander Downer, Stefan Halper, and others, were there to try and retrieve what he told me. So the whole thing was very pre-planned, well-orchestrated, and a complete setup against the president and his team.
Wow. It's amazing. When I read your book, I mean, like you say, it's very apparent that they were trying to plant this information on you and then have another agent or another person come and retrieve it by having some kind of a conversation with you. And, I mean, they came at you so many different ways, George. It's hard to imagine. I mean, first of all, I'm so glad that they didn't actually get you, because it would have been, easy to make the mistake and slip into their clutches in a more serious way than what even happened to you. But talk to us about some of the other people who came at you, because, like you said, after Mifsud, I mean, the Australian High Commissioner, who's the ambassador, Alexander Downer, had a meeting with you. And then the walrus, Stefan Halper, later set up a meeting with you with his assistant, so to speak, Azra Turk, who we've talked about here on this show. And both of them, in my opinion, came at you, a little bit less than completely professionally. So tell the audience about that.
Yes. So the timeline is very important, and that's why my assistance in this book actually acts as the roadmap into the origins of this investigation. So on April 20th, 2016, I'm contacted by the Australian government while I'm living in London. Why the Australians reached out to me on April 20th, 2016, except to spy on me, I don't know. On April 26, 2016, Joseph Mifsud tells me this bizarre, unsolicited information about Russia and Hillary. On May 2nd, I am contacted by the DIA at the U.S. Embassy in London. These two individuals who I think are under investigation right now, named Gregory Baker and Terrence Dudley, as you saw them in the book. And after that sequence of events, Alexander Downer reaches out to me and says, "I would like to meet with you," through his assistant. I think his assistant, who had reached out to me 3 weeks earlier, says, "Would you like to meet on May 10th?" So when I get to this meeting with Alexander Downer, as you saw in the book, it was a very hostile meeting. I remember everything about this meeting because it was so bizarre. And the reason my book is so unique and why I was able to basically bring the reader into the room when these meetings is because when you have such meetings that leave an indelible mark on your memory because of how peculiar they are. That's why I was able to do it. And immediately upon sitting down with Alexander Downer, I never thought that this person was a diplomat. I didn't consider him a friendly diplomat. I saw him as some sort of spy. Now, at the time, did I know that he was spying on me for this nonsense with Mifsud, and Mifsud was likely working with him? Of course not. But what I did think he was spying on me for was about my ties to the energy business in the Middle East, Israel, etc., which later on, as you saw, Stefan Halper ends up spying on me for as well. So I saw Alexander Downer pulling his phone out, recording me. I didn't know what to do. He pulled out his phone numerous times. I ended up reporting him to the FBI and Bob Mueller. And something that many people don't understand, and this is probably something very unique for your listeners, is that Bob Mueller's team essentially confirmed to me that Downer was recording my conversation. So who sent Alexander Downer to spy on me, to record my conversation on May 10th, 2016, almost 3 months before the official launch date of this hoax? That's the question that people like Attorney General Barr are looking into. That's why President Trump went to the UK to find out who was running these British and Australian spies at me as an American citizen working for candidate Trump, and to get to the bottom of it. And, I'll say one more thing on this.
Well, hey, George, can I hold you over on that thought until after the break? Because we're coming up on a hard break. But I just want to say, what a bombshell you just dropped. They were spying on you at least 3 months before the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was even opened. So exactly how were they doing that? They were violating your Fourth Amendment. We'll be right back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We have got such a special guest today. We want to jump right back into it with him, and that's George Papadopoulos. And we're so pleased to have you on the show, George. And just before the break, you were telling us that you had kind of had some interaction with Bob Mueller's team after the fact, and you sort of learned from that Alexander Downer was recording you. So tell us where you were headed with some of that information.
Sure. So Alexander Downer, as I explained, and I felt immediately upon meeting him in 2016 that he was spying on me. I didn't understand exactly what he was trying to do with the information I was giving him because he was basically asking me a lot of questions about China, which he's actually a board member of this Chinese telecoms company that the president just banned from operating in America, called Huawei. He also was a board member of this private intelligence organization named Halakit, which Stefan Halper was actually a board member of too, hence why I believe this was all a coordinated operation against me. And third, he was basically talking to me about the energy business in Israel, which I was promoting American companies in, and he was on the board of an Australian energy company that was trying to operate there too, named Woodside. So this guy, Downer, clearly had motives to spy on me because I was stepping on his toes. I was getting very close to power, obviously working with candidate Trump, and probably was going to roadblock a lot of his goals, and maybe his personal goals, and the Australian government's goals, and even the British government's goals. So it's very complicated. But in my book, I explain the motivations for why I believe he himself got involved in spying on me, and later on why the British as well were keeping very close tabs on me, to the extent that they ended up sending me Prime Minister Theresa May's letter of congratulations to President-elect Trump, to show me that, they were keeping very close tabs on me. And a lot of it has to do with my background. And you're going to see that moving forward as more things are declassified, that the main reason that I was being spied on by all these individuals was because of my energy background in the Middle East.
Well, that's right. And you were actually proposing kind of a reworking of the U.S. alliances in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that has a lot of effect on oil and gas pipelines, and there's a lot of competition for those pipelines, to control those pipelines and which countries those pipelines go through. And big countries like Turkey are really involved in that. And you had a really very interesting take on a way to rework the alliances in the Eastern Mediterranean to the great benefit of the U.S. and other democracies like Greece and Israel. that I know you've worked a lot with. And that's all in your book. And folks, I mean, we don't have time to cover it here on the show today in the kind of detail that it deserves. But I can tell you George's book is a very easy read. It's a fascinating read. It takes you right in the room with him and gives you a play-by-play on everything that was happening. And so if I could, I want to switch over because we had a couple of other topics we want to hit with you that all involve your story, and there are details we haven't even gotten to yet. So one of the details we wanted to touch on is after they'd already reached out to you with Alexander Downer, with the two DIA guys, with the walrus Stefan Halper, then there was a guy who came at you from Israel, which is a place where you have a lot of contacts and have tried to do some business and make some contacts. And he wanted you to fly with him to Cyprus, and his name was Charles, and is it Tawel?
Tawel, yes.
Tawel. Okay, Charles Tawel. So he wanted to fly you to Cyprus, and I've actually been to Cyprus myself. It's a very interesting little island. I spent my time down in Ayia Napa, as you might imagine, but you were doing very business there. So you started out in Nicosia, and then you went to some kind of strange apartment hotel that was run by a Vietnamese lady, apparently, which seemed very out of character. And that's where Charles Tawel tried to give you $10,000 cash, which, was a retainer, which something I'm familiar with as a lawyer. And then you flew back to the U.S., and when you got back to the U.S., tell the folks what happened.
Yes. So this person, Charles Tawel, if anybody is interested, you could simply Google his name, and you will see that he's been outed as a CIA source in South Africa. So clearly he has ties to the CIA. Mm-hmm. That's not innuendo. That's a simple Google search will reveal that. And you're absolutely right. He was proposing a business deal with me that was never clear, and he drops $10,000 in cash in my hand in a hotel room. And I was very suspicious about it because I kept telling him I want a contract. I want to know exactly what this is about. Let's set up a LLP or an LLC or a corporation and have a formal bank account. And he kept saying, no, let's not do it like that. So I flew to Greece. I dropped the money off with my lawyers there the day after or so. And I told Charles Tawel, I don't want your money. Come pick it up. And he said, I don't want my money back. Now, why is this very important? Because just a couple weeks ago, there was a bombshell article that came out about Andrew Weissman coordinating with Cypriot authorities to investigate potential money laundering crimes of Trump associates. And I think that Charles Tawel was actually a plant by the special counsel. There's a reason why when I flew back to the United States, I was arrested at the airport where they were looking for this money.
Right.
And also why up until my sentencing, not only was a special counsel trying to retrieve that $10,000, but they ended up fining me $9,500, which was the absolute maximum they could have fined me in order to try and retrieve the money back that way. Now, that money is still with my lawyers in Athens. I'm expecting the bar or Durham or Congress to investigate the bills, as I think those were marked. And should those be marked, and should that have been an entrapment attempt against me using a U.S. intelligence asset, Charles Tawel, you're going to see a huge new can of worms opening up that America might not even be ready for, because as you explained, that effort to basically retrieve the money is why they arrested me in the savage-like manner they did. And unfortunately for them, the money they were never able to retrieve the money, and it's probably going to be traced back to the special counsel or even the FBI itself, and that's a big problem.
George, Roxanne Wilder here, and I just want to share with our listeners this quote. An agent says to you during this time when they're investigating you, this is what happens when you work for Trump. What did you think when you heard that?
What I thought when I heard that, coming off a transatlantic flight, and I was expecting to basically fly back to Chicago, drop off some stuff, get on my clothes, and move to New York, where I had an interview with Fox News. And the last thing I expected was that agents would be waiting there for me, sneering me and telling me, without telling me why I was being arrested, that this is what happens when you work for President Trump. So immediately upon that situation at Dulles Airport by these, what I think were some corrupt bad apples in the FBI and probably Mueller's team as a whole. I knew that this was they were going for Trump. They were going to try and squeeze me and others to get him, and they were looking for scalps immediately. They weren't looking for justice. They were just looking to make President Trump look bad. And, should certain things have gone differently, and if I had fallen into some of these incredible traps that they set for me and probably others, we might be looking at a much different situation in this country today. So that's all I could say about that.
Well, George, you have such an incredible story. We're so happy you're sharing it with us today. And it does have a happy ending in the sense that through all this, you met your wife.
Yes, I did. I met my beautiful wife through this. She's been an incredible person and a great supporter of mine. And, if it wasn't for her, we probably wouldn't be talking today. My book wouldn't be out. And I'd probably be somewhere hiding, licking my wounds and trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Because, she really gave me the courage and the voice when I didn't have a voice, actually. I'm not sure if you remember, but she was always on TV. And, she gave some pretty interesting interviews before I could even talk that kept a lot of intrigue in my story. And, but we're happily married. We're in Los Angeles now. And things are great, but it was a very difficult process to get from where we started to now. But God works in mysterious ways.
That's amazing, George. You have such a great story. Now, what are some of your plans for the immediate future?
So I spent the last 7 months or so writing my book, and it just came out a couple months ago, so I'm currently still on my book tour. I'm going to be doing some more speaking over the next months or so. And quite frankly, I want to get back into public service. There's been some interest by the party to float the idea of me running for Congress here in California and some of the districts once things become a little more clear and Durham's and Barr's investigations completely exonerate me, which I think they will. And now that the president openly supports me on Twitter, which he has, and obviously conservative media and people like Rush Limbaugh and, other massive platforms like that have openly suggested I do it. I'm looking into that myself, but I haven't confirmed that yet. And right now I'm basically supporting my wife, too, who's she's acting here. She's an actress in Los Angeles. So we're taking things one step at a time. And but certainly public service is something I want to get back into in the medium term at the earliest.
Well, I think you were born for it. I think your level of maturity just shines through in the book. I mean, it's an amazing level of groundedness and maturity for a gentleman of your age. You're still a fairly young man. And, to be able to have all this thrown at you. And, you behaved very diplomatically throughout all of these incidents with all of these folks who allege themselves to be diplomats, but it turns out are just crass spies. And that really shines through. So I think you got a very bright future. And let me just put in a plug here for the Tampa Bay area because we have one of the largest Greek communities in the whole country. If you get the chance to come here to Tampa, come down and visit us in Tarpon Springs. I bet you're going to find a lot of supporters down here, and certainly something that we on the Morgan Streetman Show would love to be involved with you.
Oh, that would be wonderful, and yes, I'd be very happy to do that. And please, let's definitely coordinate something like that because the Greek American community has obviously been very supportive. I'm part of that community in many ways. Obviously, my parents are from Greece. And I've heard great things about Tarpon Springs and wonderful food down there. So I'm always up for a great Greek meal down there and to meet some great people, and including yourselves in person. So be happy to do that. Thank you.
Fantastic, George. We look forward to it. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. It was a big treat for me in particular.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
All right. Well, folks, I mean, you can't beat that right there. Now, I'm in heaven. George Papadopoulos just came on and told us all about his book, Deep State Target. You got to get the book. You got to read the book. It's written at a place where everybody can read it. Everybody can understand it. George is such a down-to-earth guy. He's got an amazing story. And, folks, I mean, I couldn't highly recommend enough that you go out there on Amazon and you get George's book. You're going to learn some things that you haven't even learned from us, and it's going to blow your mind. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I tell you what, I've got a big, eating grin on my face. I tell you, I'm just basking in the afterglow of that interview right there with one of my.
With him.
Yeah, wasn't that awesome? I mean, I just love that guy. First of all, I mean,
doesn't go on just anybody's show. He's on with Hannity, he's on with Rush, and with you.
Morgan Streetman
Morgan
too.
Streetman.
Don't forget Morgan Streetman. I tell you what, though, I mean, I just really like his spirit. He's such a grounded guy. I mean, he could be totally ticked off at this. And that's what we're going to talk about, some of our out there. And, I had a whole list of questions for him. We barely even really got to scratch the surface because of the limited time and the format that we've got. But there's a lot more to talk about. Like just yesterday, Mark Meadows went on Maria Bartiromo's show, and he dropped the bombshell that he fully believes that the transcripts are going to come out from the spying interview where Downer, and you got to get the book, folks, Deep State Target. It's well worth the read. It's very accessible. It's not going to be over your head. By the end of it, you're going to understand everything that happened, the whole sequence of events, and you're probably going to be pretty fired up about it because, Roxanne, like you were saying during the break, it's amazing at what our investigators did to this man. Mm-hmm. I mean, they breached his constitutional rights and tried to set him up and entrap him, all to get to President Trump, to create a false narrative about stuff going on with President Trump. And so apparently the Boy Scouts ain't Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. They're behaving worse in many cases, it seems like, than some of the criminals that they're busting with some of the schemes that they're pulling. And so what I think may come out soon, because I wonder why Congressman Meadows would talk about it if he didn't know that this is on its way to declassification at some point soon. And, of course, the Democrats are pushing for the declassification of everything underlying the Mueller report. So let's get the actual transcript of when Alexander Downer was spying on and taping his conversation with George Papadopoulos. Let's also get the transcript when Stefan Halper, the walrus, was doing the same thing. Because in both cases, George says he feels pretty strongly he didn't pass along that information that we learned today was planted by Joseph Mifsud. It was planted on Papadopoulos to be later retrieved by Alexander Downer, and when he wasn't successful, then Stefan Halper. And so, that information, those interviews is going to come out. And what's going to happen? How are you going to feel, folks, when the transcript comes out and you see that, George Papadopoulos was told the truth the whole time, that he never lied to investigators because he didn't say this stuff that Downer says he said. What are we going to do then?
Mm-hmm. So you've got the plotters in the FBI and the CIA, and of course they enlisted the help of other intelligence services from other nations, Britain, Australia. But Italy is changing things, or I should say they've taken a step in the direction to do so because they're holding hearings, or they did, in Parliament to declassify material related to this Joseph Mifsud guy.
Right. And of course, we still don't really know who all these people are, but as more and more evidence comes out, what's becoming apparent is they're not who they appear to be. A lot of them are made up to look like Russian agents and other things. But when it comes right down to it, we find out they work for our own CIA or our own FBI, and they have done for years. Like just yesterday, we learned Carter Page, there's another person who was kind of tied up in all this, although there's some question as to whether Carter Page was a willing participant. And you got to get George's book because he gets into some of the details about some of these other players. But it's just now come out by his own hand from Carter Page that he's been a CIA asset for decades, he says. Decades he's worked for the CIA and also apparently the FBI, but CIA was the one he was covering yesterday on Maria Bartiromo's show. So then it comes into question whether he was perhaps even a willing participant in this entire setup, both to get the dossier into the circulation and also to get the wiretaps on President Trump's campaign.
So this whole tangled ball of string is going to come unraveled someday. Where would you say the raveling is right about now? I would say it's just starting. It's just starting because the American people don't really have a good sense for all the details. Mm-hmm. And the details have been kept under lock and key by the ongoing Mueller investigation.
where we couldn't release any of this because it has to do with an ongoing investigation. Now, granted, the investigation was a hoax. It was a farce, but that was all they needed to protect the documents and protect the information that shows us what they were really up to. Well, now that investigation's over with, now it becomes appropriate to release some of this information, the source documents and other things. And I think it's as that begins to drib and drab out, I hope people are still paying attention. I hope they care enough. I certainly know I care. I mean, I'm pretty upset about the idea that our domestic and even our international intelligence services basically turned against one presidential campaign in favor of the other campaign, and they tried to help Hillary Clinton win the election. I mean, that's shocking. That's just absolutely shocking, and there's no universe in which you're going to convince me that that was justified or okay, right? There just isn't. I mean, unless you could show me that Trump was doing some major stuff, which nobody has ever proved any links of conspiracy or collusion with the Russians. So there was absolutely nothing underlying this entire hoax, right? That's the point. The only thing they've got is they claim the Russians interfered in our elections. And on this show, we've proved that, okay, maybe they did, but it was such a small amount. It's what we call a drop in the bucket that it really couldn't have had any actual effect. If 10 grand spent on a couple of platforms changed a bunch of Americans' minds, then we've got a lot more problems in this country, than the fact that the Russians want to interfere with our election, because we got a bunch of people that aren't thinking for themselves. They're voting based on a meme. And I don't really think that's the case, folks. We know you're thinking out there. I mean, somebody's listening to our show. Somebody's listening to Hannity. Somebody's listening to Rush Limbaugh. People are thinking about this and trying to work this out for themselves.
Reminder, if you want to hear that interview with George Papadopoulos, you can once again today on Money Talk 1010 on 5 p.m. And Morgan, that was so good.
Wasn't that good?
We're going to also include it in Mindset Matters at noon on Friday, too.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow, what a treat, folks. We so enjoyed that interview. And like I said, you need to go out there. It's available on Amazon. It's well worth the money. It's a great read. You got to go get George Papadopoulos' book, Deep State Target. And, hold the phones because, we're going to be working on getting him down here now. We got to get him down here to Tarpon Springs. It's a perfect fit for him. He wants to do some politics, which I think he's made for. I think he'd be a great politician. He's got such a good head on his shoulders. And, I could see there being a lot of reasons for him to enjoy visiting the Tampa Bay pretty regularly.
He almost said, guaranteed he wanted to eat a gyro with you.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We'll get some tzatziki sauce. We'll get some shrimps.
Baklava, yes.
Baklava. We'll be set. And we've got the best of the best over here in Tarpon Springs. So, well, folks, thank you so much for joining us today on the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm almost speechless at this point. Like I said, I just want to go sit and listen to this interview over and over and over again and think about it. That's how much fun I had today. Hope you had a little bit of fun doing it, too. What a treat for us. And go get George Papadopoulos' book. Folks, I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.